Awesome, it's 5 o'clock, so we'll get started. Hi, I'm Anna Marquise, Acting Director, and welcome to the People's Review Live, hosted by us, the Equality State Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to improve the lives of all Wyoming's people through transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. The People's Review Live is designed to help people across Wyoming engage with our government and keep up with important issues and debates. When we work together, we can ensure transparent government, fair elections, and thriving communities. And that's never been more important than it is right now. This event is possible thanks to the generous support of our People's Review Live Leadership Circle members, Marcia Kunstill and Joe Albright, Joanne Skyam True and Shane True, and Mike Shanzi and Kathy Jenkins, and an anonymous donor. If you'd like to become a Leadership Circle member, please send me an email or drop your name in the chat and we'll find you. And I'll pass it off to Jenny and she'll get us started.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Jenny DeCero and I serve as the ESPC's board chair right now. And I'm honored to be here today to do this, to facilitate today's conversation about redistricting. A quick housekeeping recap on the format. People's Review Live is a webinar format, so you can see and hear the panelists. However, the panelists do not see you, they see each other. So that means if you have a question or some sort of response, please, we invite you to put that in the chat so that we can see those. So that's our only way of engaging with you as audience. Again, thanks for attending. I'm going to introduce our panelists today. Representative Yin was elected to the Wyoming House of Representatives in 2018 and sits on the Revenue and Judiciary Committees, as well as serving on the Broadband Task Force. When he is not in session, he is a software developer. Representative Yin earned a BS in computer science from Carnegie Mellon University. Hope I didn't slaughter them. And then we have Representative Zwonitzer of Cheyenne was elected to the Wyoming House of Representatives in 2005. Currently co-chair of the Joint Corporations Elections and Political Subdivisions Committee and of the Select House on Legislative Facilities, Technology, and Process Committee. He is the second longest serving member of the House in Wyoming. And Representative Zwonitzer earned his MBA from the University of Wyoming. Marguerite Herman is a lobbyist for the League of Wyoming Voters of Wyoming and has advocated for several other groups in Wyoming on local, state, and national level. She wrote the most recent edition of the Wyoming League of Women's Voters, A Look at Wyoming Government, and presented a Legislative 101 program to various groups. Marguerite has an educational and professional background in education and journalism and currently serves as a trustee for the Laramie County School District. Ben Williams is a program principal in the Elections and Redistricting program at the National Conference of State Legislatures. Along with the program director, he manages NCLS's redistricting portfolio. Before coming to NCLS, Ben was a public policy researcher at Princeton University. He has a JD from William and Mary Law School and a BA in International Relations and History from Tulane University and is admitted to practice law in Colorado. So with that, we have a wonderful repertoire here of expertise. So we're going to dive right in. In my preliminary little chat, I discovered that redistricting is different in every state. So that is something that I think is fascinating. And so I would like to know why in the state of Wyoming, why is the Corporations Committee taking the lead? And how does that maybe differ from some of the other states?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about why corporations is taking the lead. So every 10 years after the census, the legislature selects a committee to run redistricting. 10 years ago, it was a corporations committee, as the corporations committee in Wyoming is one of our what we call 10 standing committees, and it's actually called corporations, elections, and political subdivisions. And political subdivisions just mean cities and counties. And so the corporations committee historically handles all election issues, secretary of state issues, and then local government. And before 2012, they had commissions set up of legislators. I believe the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate and the Management Council this term said, hey, our corporations committee are all long-serving members, both in the House and the Senate. They've been ramping up for redistricting, and our committee was kind of naturally geographically diverse around the state of Wyoming and politically diverse in Wyoming terms. We do have a Democrat and the independent in our legislature on the House side. And so instead of getting a select committee, especially with budget restrictions, it was charged to us as a standing committee made up of senior members who I think 3 of us in the House and 3 in the Senate were in the last redistricting process. 2 in the Senate have been through multiple 3 or 4 time redistricting processes. So it naturally kind of fell to us without a specialized committee to take up the mantle to run redistricting this year, according to the Management Council of the Legislature.
And Jenny, could I add a couple of thoughts there as well? The League of Women Voters in other states has called for independent commissions instead of a standing committee. And the reason being that they seem to have the independence from political self-dealing, conflicts of interest. You could trust them. And I appreciate that may be the case in other states, but right now, I agree with Representative Zwonitzer, Chairman Zwonitzer, that the Corporations Committee is well positioned. We are short on time to educate the committee members, to educate the public, to get this out. And so I think it's going to be more efficient. They hit the ground running. They already have. They just got the numbers and they're hitting the ground running. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And can we trust a standing committee, again, ethically, to be transparent? And I think the answer is yes. They have the ethical standards, and they're used to dealing with the legislature and all the controls on that sort of thing. The only thing, and maybe Representative Zwonitzer can respond to this, that the only real concern might be that theoretically they have something to gain by the lines being drawn. And so will they be aware of that? Will they be, call each other saying, out on the conflict of interest? And I guess I would like him and also maybe Representative Yen to weigh in about with the short timeline. The lobbyists are going to be out in force. Can the public get, will their voice rise to the top? And as legislators are used to hearing that cacophony of lobbyists versus, and so that might help you also sort things out and make sure the public is heard. So I know there's about 10 things in there, but if you could really sort of talk about whether you can avoid the appearance of conflict of interest, and if your experience as legislators is going to help you kind of sort out the noise.
I'll take the first step. So in Wyoming, our Constitution gives the legislature the power to do redistricting. So even if we had a separate redistricting commission, it would ultimately be voted on by the legislature. Many states have a bipartisan redistricting independent commission, depending what the state looks like. With Wyoming being so blanketed Republican in many respects, I actually worry that if an independent commission presented a plan, we'd start the process all over again anyway. But I do have a lot of faith and trust. As I said, our corporations committee is made up of senior legislators. We don't have any freshmen in the House or the Senate. So we've all, got a little political armor on, been through the process. Senator Scott's been through redistricting 4 times, Senator Case 3 times, Representative Roscoe and I at least once each. And so we have a general idea of what's coming, and the political powers that be, from lobbyists, from ideologies out there. I think we can drown out the noise and focus on a product that we will be proud to present to the legislature. has been said many times, once it goes to the full legislature, it always seems to have a couple of minor tweaks, but the Corporations Committee's plan is to do a solid, impartial and completely fair integrity process and a plan on December 1st to give to our colleagues that we believe, meets all of the U.S. Supreme Court guidelines and our kind of ethical standards we've set for ourselves.
So maybe to add on or provide some contrast, I would say that I think Representative Zwonitzer is correct, because the requirement is in our Constitution that the legislature holds that responsibility. Ultimately, it will come down to the legislature. So at the most, all we could do is have an advisory commission unless we amended our Constitution in some way. Some states do have constitutional requirements for the redistricting to happen by a commission, and so that doesn't happen in the form of a bill. The commission itself creates the district lines, and the legislature actually has no approval in it. However, I would say that even if we were that way, which we're not, no matter what, redistricting is going to be a political process, and that means politics will be involved in some way. There is benefit to having subject matter experts that are only focused on redistricting versus us as a legislature having to be subject matter experts in everything. However, there's also benefits to us as the legislators being the ones to do it, because we also understand both our regions and as well as and our districts as they currently are, as well as just going through a political process that is very political, with voices coming in from all sides and trying to make sure that you balance them all correctly. So those are my 2 cents.
The only thing I think that I could add is that Wyoming's redistricting system is the most common type of redistricting system, where the legislature has a committee that drafts a bill, and it's voted on by both chambers, and the governor can either sign it or veto it, and then the legislature can override the veto. That is the case in 35 states for legislative district lines. Now, some of those states do have an advisory commission, as has been referenced by Representatives Zwonitzer and Yin, but in the end, the legislature has the final say on how those lines are drawn. There are a growing handful, but still a minority of states that have some form of a redistricting commission, but Wyoming is not alone in the way that it does redistricting. It is quite common.
Great. Thank you all. I did hear December 1st as a deadline, and I'm curious, what is the process between now and December 1st, and is there opportunity for public engagement?
So the general process is, for the next 3 months, the redistricting plan will come forward as what we consider a legislative bill. And so LSO, regardless of what the legislative bill is, has asked all legislation, including the redistricting plan, to generally be finalized by December 1st. We have the holidays, and then historically, even though session doesn't start till February 14th, there'll be a lot of very small tweaks to the redistricting plan as the county clerks look at the plan, and they look at special districts, taxation districts, population census blocks. The county clerks in each county will go through that and do small tweaks, hopefully small tweaks, to ensure that everything is right before the plan is presented to the legislature as a whole in February. As a budget session, it's a very short session. We'll have about 2.5 weeks to get it through the process, hopefully unscathed, with a good plan from the committee. But so December 1st is kind of the tentative deadline to have the plan the Corporations Committee sponsoring to be sent for LSO approval and to be worked on for the little tweaks until February. We're hoping we get there. For the next 3 months, that means a lot of public meetings in person, a lot of Zoom meetings. Our next meeting will be September 3rd in Sheridan as our next meeting, and then we'll continue the calendar based kind of on the events as we slowly get rolling.
Excuse me, Jenny. So I was wondering if Chairman Zwonitzer could briefly address this public portal, because talking about public input, there's this thing, and it seems like the committee wasn't really wild about it. It wasn't, the vote was kind of close for it, but Is it going to be too unwieldy for the public to use because it's highly complex? And is that a realistic way for the public to consider different plans?
So in my opinion, we have, I think there's 7 or 8 kind of publicly available resources nationwide that will allow the public to independently, look at census districts, draw maps of their own volition. The program we use called Maptitude is what our legislature has chosen to be the final, drawing map for redistricting. And so ultimately any files will have to be in Maptitude's format. And so we have allowed $40,000 of taxpayer money. I didn't vote yes, but it did pass by a couple votes for any member of the public to be able to use the program and submit to us their own maps. And so the feedback was some states, have had 8 or 9 individuals submit plans. Other states have had 300 or 400 from members of the public. And those tend to be about congressional districts a bit more than state legislative districts. But we did think it's really important because of the very short time frame this year to be able to allow all members of the public not to have to wait on some of the legislators to help them draw the maps, that if they have access to a public portal, that they can draw the maps and submit them to our committee, in very short time. We can review those and weigh them against other plans. So we thought it was important with the short time frame to have that. Basically anybody can submit a plan, not even in Wyoming. It'll be interesting if other places submit redistricting plans for us, but we wanted to make sure we had the public participation as much as possible and be very accountable and transparent with how we go about these things.
I'm just curious, Ben, do you happen to know, like nationally, how others have public engage?
So some states do have a portal. I know that, so Maptitude is one of the biggest suppliers of redistricting software to states. They're quite common. I think they're probably the largest vendor. There are some other companies that do it as well, but all of the companies that offer redistricting services to states also have web portals as an option that they offer, which I think is what Representative Zwonitzer was referring to. There are some states that use free software. As I understand it, the downside of that is that if you wanted to incorporate the public comment into your own redistricting software for speed purposes, because there's no timeline, then there's an advantage to using the option supplied by your software vendor. But again, there's costs associated with that. It really just depends. I know that in New Mexico, they're using a free software partner from a university in Massachusetts, but that's because their budget was so tight. They had absolutely no budget for that, to offer that. So it varies, but what I am sensing is going on in Wyoming is pretty common. You have hearings around the state. You sort of do the roadshow and you go around and you have hearings in different places to allow people to have a shorter distance to travel. And then there's usually an opportunity to comment orally. And then some states, not all, Wyoming might be a little bit more open than most on this, but some states have the portal option where you can actually draw a map. I will say that that's relatively new this cycle. The software capability wasn't necessarily there 10 years ago to do this. So it'll be interesting to see in 2023 when we look back how many states ended up doing this. But the tight timeline has really put a lot of states in a bind, and they're trying to just move as quickly as they can so that they don't violate their own laws and redistrict too late. Which states are using the same software as Wyoming? I've asked Maptitude and they will not tell us who their clients are. So can't tell you, but the states can voluntarily disclose that. I know that Colorado, where I am, I'm in Denver right now. Colorado is using Esri. My understanding is New Mexico is using Maptitude as well. There's a couple, but Maptitude is quite common.
Yeah, so at the NCSL redistricting conference, the vendors were there and had time to meet with individual states. And I will say that they had a small little seminar on their own just to go through the software. And there were a significant number of people in that room from various different states. So And for the 3 major vendors, they all had a significant number of people. So it's kind of split between states, but definitely a lot. We're not the only one.
Great. So I'm gonna, I implore people to keep an eye on that chat because I saw some answers are being just put directly into the chat. So I'm gonna just move on to another question, which is, how do we make sure that you protect the one person, one vote? And how do you make sure the districts are substantially equal?
Yeah, I'll go for that one, and maybe Representative Zwonitzer can fill in. So one person, one vote basically comes from the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution, and it is meant to make sure that each person in the state has equal voting power when it comes to our representation, right? So to do that, you want to make sure that the population of each district is generally the same. And there are court cases that have challenged different population districts. So some states didn't redistrict at all every 10 years. And so it got to the point where cities had grown so large that their district populations were so large in those districts, while the rural districts had populations that were extremely small, to the point where one representative for a rural district, each of the voters in their district had more voting power by orders of magnitude than someone who lived in a city. And so those court cases basically define what kind of things are permissible for deviation in keeping an average population over the district. And that tends to look like around 5%, but no one has ever, I mean, there's no court case that said this is explicitly the number of deviation allowed before you violate one person, one vote, and what isn't. So 5% is generally what LSO has pretty much advised is known permissibility of deviation in population per district.
And Jenny, I'll just comment briefly here, a little feather in the cap of the League of Women Voters. In 1991, in Gorin versus Carpin, the League took all the way to the US Supreme Court, as a matter of fact, the issue of proportionality, because little known fact, our state constitution says every county should get its own seat in the House. And that results in wildly disproportionate representation between, say, and the two extremes are Niobrara County and Laramie County. And I know that and the Supreme Court said you don't have to change your constitution, but you should just ignore that provision. And so, it's there, but I think Representative Yin is exactly right. Plus or minus 5% is the standard. And it's the one that the court has told us we must do. And for the League of Women Voters, that proportionality is just a foundational, I mean, without which the representative government is just cannot work. And so I know that some legislators want to fudge the numbers this way or that way, and various groups are advocate to go back to the county and be kind of defiant. And I think Senator Case kind of spiked that one at the meeting last week, and just, it is not going to work, and can we move on? And so I don't know if that conversation is dead yet, but I guess more to come.
Anyone else on that? Okay, so when a map gets redrawn, how is that going to affect incumbents, or how does that affect the next legislate or election cycle, if at all?
Oh, it certainly will. I think the honest answer is we don't know yet. And so depending on which legislator, we're tentatively looking at the current 60 House member, 30 Senator plan, which is what we've had for the past 10 years. I will advocate and am advocating for a lower number of legislators, and actually 52 House, 26 Senate fits almost perfectly among county lines, which is really the number one issue in redistricting we're trying to follow, is to not go over county lines as much as possible. So 10 years, I'll tell you what happened 10 years ago is the committee tried diligently to write a plan without knowing where the current legislators lived. And as we got close to the end, we did ultimately say, hey, where does everybody live? And we had two sets of groupings where legislators were just in the same district. So, ultimately it is the legislature has to approve the plan by a majority in both houses. And I'm just guessing if you don't have most of the legislators in their home districts, they're not as likely to vote for the plan. And it also seems very territorial. If you run in a certain legislative or senatorial district, like I am District 43, there's a big push by incumbents to make sure they keep that district number because they have the signs and the literature already pre-made from previous campaigns. So that'll be another interesting issue we deal with that's down the road. But, we can look at the current census numbers and put it over the current map. And it looks like 4 legislators right now in the House. I'm not sure about the Senate, but 4 House members, 8 total will be in the same district. They just live too close with the new census numbers for us to draw the lines creatively to protect them. So at the 60-30 level.
So just a quick, so even keeping the 60-30 level, there's a chance that some people they'll have to like run again for election of that one district that they're both in, or they arm wrestle behind the scenes, something creative. And then, and then if we go to the 52-26, that same scenario still could happen. Is there an advantage to shrinking?
Well, there's
or
certainly,
disadvantage?
the advantage and disadvantages are in representational democracy. The more legislators we have, every individual gets more of a voice, although that gets ratioed out. But everybody certainly feels like they have more of a hometown legislator, certainly. But, we only have 575,000 people. 5 states have less legislators than Wyoming does. And so if we're cutting the executive branch 15%, I think we can cut the legislative branch a bit, is my personal thought, and it breaks cleaner. You can imagine that you just look at the census map, urban areas, if we can call Wyoming urban at all, but your Laramie, your Cheyenne, your Jackson, Sheridan, even Cody are growing, the cities are growing, the rural areas are continuing to lose population. And so that rural representation will be strained regardless. I'm just trying to find the best map that fits. And so what would happen is in the next election cycle, people would have to choose. They would run against each other, someone would retire, etc. But I'll tell you, if you look 10 years in the future, trying to save people's seats for one more election when they're gone in 2 or 4 or 6 years has really weird consequences, 10 years later where we are now. And you can see where I think everybody, at least in the legislature, agrees that we potentially use the word gerrymander in a district when we drove a 60-mile line up to the medium security prison in Torrington to fulfill Laramie County's numbers. We're going to be working against that, at least while I'm chairman, to not have any accusations of gerrymandering or really squiggly weird lines. To protect anybody would be my hope, that it's about the people and making sure they're represented, and any current legislative occupants probably aren't going to be there in 8 years, and so we shouldn't consider that. That being said, I got to have enough legislators to vote for the plan. So that's the conundrum.
Yeah, that's the thing about just referencing earlier of saying it's a political process, and you have people who need to vote on a plan, but if it makes it personal for them, they might take it personally, unfortunately. So it is also, I think it's important for the citizens of Wyoming to also push back and be like, this should not be your concern. Your concern should be the fairest representation for the state of Wyoming.
Jenny, could I ask the legislators a question, which would be, is there going to be a problem with the legendary Lincoln County, which is probably the poster child for a county with radically different maybe cultures or interests in North and South, but they'd have to live together and share a representative. Is that what I'm seeing in your plan, Chairman Zwonitzer?
And so we haven't even really developed a plan yet, but it is fascinating, shall we say, that Lincoln County for the first time qualifies for 1 senator and 2 House reps. And so the Corporations Committee's principles are to try to draw within county lines as much as possible. But I do think you see Northern Lincoln County aligned much more with Sublette and Teton, and Southern Lincoln aligned with Uinta. However, Uinta County has exactly the right number of people right now for 2 House and 1 senator. So your lines are going to get weird if you don't keep Lincoln County together.
Yeah.
That being said, I do think there's a big push in Lincoln County, likely not to be combined as a county. And so we would just have to, reference that. The county commissioners and the cities say, we really truly believe it's best to kind of draw ourselves in half. I think as long as we document that and have broad public support, especially from elected officials, saying this is what we all agree on, that's defensible in court and a much easier sell in the legislature.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about as you're drawing lines and it's been mentioned trying to stick with county lines, but and then there was the county clerks come in because there's a whole bunch of other layers of lines from school districts to precincts to an array. So maybe just some more on that. And Ben, you could even talk about that on the national level if you have any perspective to why that is that way and how you try to do that.
Sure. So I'll defer to the exact tack that Wyoming is taking. But in terms of nationally, one of the reasons why redistricting deadlines for most states are so far ahead of the next scheduled election. So a lot of states have late fall, year ending in 1 deadline, so fall of 2021 deadlines, is because it takes a long time to, particularly in places where you have a lot of population concentration, to create all of the different kinds of ballots that you need to make for your primary elections for all of the races. If you think about, if you're a county clerk creating all of the ballots you need, every single distinction gets its own unique ballot type. So if you have one person who's in legislative district A, Senate district B, and school district X, and there's an election for school board, and ward J for the office, that's one type of ballot. It just takes a long time for the county clerks to go through and process all of that information and make sure that all of the voters are assigned to the correct places so that all the correct races are on their ballots. And so all of that work is typically done after the fact, after the redistricting plan has been passed and signed into law. And this is not, states are going to have to move quickly this cycle because the census data that states use to redistrict is so late. It's 4.5 months late compared to when it's supposed to arrive according to federal law. States are in a pinch and they have to move quickly, and there's no good information on exactly how long it takes, but I've spoken with county clerks before in several states, in Georgia and Florida and Colorado, and they all tell me the same thing, which is that when we get the maps from the legislature, we just have to hit the ground running, and we put all of our staff onto making sure voters are assigned correctly, because the last thing you want as a county clerk is for some news story to come out in 2027 or 2028 that says that 15,000 voters in your county have been voting in the wrong districts all decade, which does happen. That has happened in other states. It happened in Virginia this past decade, where I went to law school. So it's not unheard of, and making sure that the county clerks have time to do all of that processing is built into the system as it's supposed to operate in most states, including Wyoming.
And that's why we'll have our plan, hopefully December 1st, to give the county clerks those 2 months as they track our lines to make sure we don't have precincts like where I grew up, where only 3 Republicans voted in the primary. And I know how I voted. And so I usually knew how the other 2 Republicans voted as well in the primary ballot. And everybody else, if they knew of when it was a 3-0 vote, exactly how I voted for. So we do everything we can to prevent small precincts to, have that problem that would show, a voter's tabulation.
Yeah, so I believe, a county clerk would be able to answer this question much better, but I believe precinct lines are specifically drawn to minimize the number of types of ballots so they can more efficiently administer elections. And I believe the Corporations Committee will be working with the clerks to make sure that the clerks are involved to help keep what Representative Zwonitzer was pointing out from happening. So you don't have to divide down to 100,000 precincts with 3 people each, and you have a minimal number of precincts that kind of fit to make a specific number of ballots reasonable.
So along this vein, once the legislature has their proposal and the clerks have looked at it, and then after it passes the legislature, do the clerks then, is there a potential that some precincts may shift as well, or some of those other lines, like school board lines or cemetery district lines, those various irrigation district?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the real, I would say, danger is that we have a plan presented in December. It's reviewed by all the county clerks, and then there are amendments on the floor in February, in that 2-week process. And if there's significant amendments, brought on the floor, the county clerks, it's a very stressful time. They've actually hired some outside GIS developers as well to be there to make sure if the legislature does amend the plan on the floor, they can quickly make sure that everything remains intact and efficient in their counties. But that being said, inevitably there will be something that gets missed, and most likely a special district, whether it's a school board or a cemetery district, may have to be withdrawn a bit in those 4 months before the primary in August. And that's just kind of based especially on the crunch this year, why it's so important the legislature presents a plan in December that everybody can buy into, because we don't want to see a lot of amendments on the floor because bad things happen.
So it sounds like if any of the members of the public want to support your clerks and send flowers throughout now until probably next ballot released, just to give them some boost, because it seems like a pretty intense process for our county clerks. Thank you. So I'm going to kind of shift a little bit to this concept of single member districts and multi-member districts. And basically my major question is, Wyoming saw a significant drop off in women elected office after 1992 change to multi-member districts. So what can you speak to about that?
Well, I'll just briefly start out, and because Laramie County, which is actually where Chairman Zwonitzer and I both live, we had 9, but now we have 10 members of the House. And under the system we had, all 9 and 10 just ran in kind of a horse race, and the top 10 vote getters got elected. So there was no head-to-head competition. There were more women elected. It's hard to say exactly that with the cause and effect, but it did seem to create a situation where there was more diversity in the election. Whether we would never go back to that, I don't think. There are plans, and Chairman Zwonitzer maybe or Mike can talk about those different forms of it, but also the complications that I think NCSL, Ben could probably talk about that. That's kind of a thorny patch as well. So I'll let you guys talk about that.
I would just say all the political literature for the last 20 years does seem to show that women are elected more when they run at large. There's also some belief that may be at lower levels like school boards or county commissions, and they may feel more comfortable running at that level. And so there's a little bit of disconnect in the data, but certainly Wyoming, I think last I looked, has the second least amount of women in our legislature of any state. And so we are keeping the door open. We've talked about and discussed that our plans moving forward will allow for multi-member districts. And so whether that's what Idaho does, where you have a Senate district and 2 at-large House members, or whether we could do it in a regionalized manner or a county manner, like Laramie County used to do, where we just put, 60 people would run and the top 10 people, would get to serve. It makes it a little bit tougher nowadays when we do have majority minority districts like the reservation. We've agreed we'll have what we call a majority minority district that's at least 51% Native. Currently, they slated it 10 years ago to be 66%. And so, there's things like that we have to consider, but certainly the conversation is ongoing because there is a belief that you have broader and wider and more fair representation when you can run at large instead of head-to-head battles tend to bring out certain personality types and seem, for whatever reason, to discourage women or minorities from running at the same numbers when you have those head-to-head battles as opposed to a broader at-large seat.
The only thing that I think I could add here is that multi-member districting schemes or not schemes, but plan types are becoming less common in the country. They used to be much more prevalent ever since the enactment of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. One of the principal uses of the Voting Rights Act was to switch from multi-member districting plans to single-member districting plans in municipalities and in legislatures, predominantly in the South, to enable districts to be drawn that had a majority minority population to allow minority populations to elect their candidates of choice, which is the standard under the Voting Rights Act as applied to redistricting. So there's been a downward trend this decade. We're at 10 states. West Virginia is shifting to single member districts, so we'll be down to 9. But as Representative Zwonitzer stated, Idaho does a 2 members elected from one district and 1 senator elected from that district. So they only draw 1 districting plan throughout the entire state, and that's multi-member in the House and single member in the Senate. That is the most common way multi-member districting works in the United States today. There are a couple of exceptions. New Hampshire has a system that is all its own, that has overlaying districts. So you have actually multiple districts for the same territory. And then Vermont uses what I believe to be is what Wyoming used in the past, where you have districts that closely align with counties, but you have multiple people elected from the largest counties, and maybe the smallest counties only elect 1 member of the House. So there's a little bit of variation in terms of women. I have not seen any research on the drop-off, as Representative Zwonitzer has stated. He's read research that says that women tend to be elected at large more than from single-member districting plans. So I would presume that is the best knowledge we have at this time.
So I will say that I think it would be very interesting to compare, because I know we have county commissions that have single-member district set up for their county commissions, and we have some that are elected at large. And it would be interesting to compare how those numbers compare across counties where we have at large county commissions and single member district county commissions. I believe we also still have a fairly lacking number of women elected to county commission as well, though. I think Jen Simon quoted it as 16 out of 93 county commissioners. So kind of honestly the same level of women representation in the legislature right now.
So I'm going to back up a tad. Can you someone give a quick little explanation of what a multi-member district is versus a single district?
Sure, yeah. So for example, in Teton County, our county commission is elected with all members at large. So we have a 5-member county commission. They run separate elections, 3 and 2, once different years. But all, for example, when 3 of the county commissioners run, all 3 of them are on the ballot for one district, which is the entire county. In a single member district situation, you have a district line drawn where only one person is for one specific seat. So that could be done on a mix, right? So we could have cities with multi-member districts. So you cover the whole city boundaries and you say this number of representatives are in it. And then you parse out the counties to have single member districts in the rest of the rural part of the county. So that could also be a possibility.
Thank you. There is a question in the chat that I wanted to get to, and it's asking, will you use doctored data that places inmates into the districts where they have lived prior to arrest or where their families live now?
Right now, the state of Wyoming, I don't think has ever used where an inmate has previously lived. It's only where they are in a population at that time of the census. So if they are in prison at the time of the census recording, then they count as in prison. Some states have moved away from that to say where they have said that they've lived before being incarcerated, but I'm not sure if we are currently considering it, but I know I've heard rumblings of people interested in it, but not that we would necessarily do it.
And so we did briefly discuss that, I think, internally, but our Constitution sets out pretty specifically that we must district based on the federal government's numbers they give us. And so we've ultimately decided that means when the federal government says these are the numbers, and we know what the prison population numbers are, that we can't divide those out. According to our Constitution, we district based on the numbers. And I don't know what other states have that specific constitutional requirement, but we believe in Wyoming without a significant legal challenge that if someone sues us on the census numbers being wrong, it doesn't matter to us. We still have to use, according to our Constitution, what was given to us by the U.S. Census Bureau.
NCSL has a webpage on the required use of census data and redistricting. And yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Wyoming is one of 22 states that explicitly require it. I'll go ahead and pop that in the chat so everyone can see it.
Thank you. So talk about some of the problems that people might think come along with redistricting. For instance, gerrymandering. If anyone was listening to the corporation's meeting on Monday, there was some discussion of that word being used too loosely and that it shouldn't be used because, so just some chat about that would be helpful.
I'll start it out if that's okay. You know, and looking into it this year, the gerrymandering is a complete distortion of a district to achieve nefarious ends. And then on the other end, you've got just blind drawing of lines and just where the numbers are equal and that's all you care about. But in between, there's a lot of room, and I think we've already talked about trying to preserve majority minority district, or we had to move a lot of lines last time to preserve communities of interest. And so we can't just look at numbers. There are you know, we have to be compact, we have to be contiguous, but the community of interest thing, Star Valley, in the middle of the session last time we redistricted, they got it changed, and it is a community of interest, I think, by any definition. So there's a lot of room in there to make sure that the lines recognize these cohesive units, and that I think is where the art is going to come in, and where the legislature, the corporations committee, and then later the legislature is going to have to listen to people and determine how we can recognize those and honor those to make sure that the representation on the state level matches the representation on regionally and on the local level. So how we draw those and what can be accommodated by numbers is really where I think it's going to get complicated. There's going to have to be some sensitivity to it, but also, you know, if the numbers don't fall, they just don't fall, and it may end up with some hard feelings. Inevitably, it might. So I would say between just those straight lines and agnostic and gerrymandering, there is a lot of room to, I think, do a lot of good work.
And a lot of it is based on geography, right? And so Star Valley is pretty well contained, and it's difficult to get to southern Lincoln County. And so that's certainly an argument for what we call a community of interest. The basin itself, geographically, really the only way out of those 4 counties that's not an hour and a half over a mountain range is south through the Wind River Canyon. And so the District 28 right now it goes through 5 counties and looks really awkward, but that was the only way to achieve the right population. There have been some questions on what is a community of interest. And it really is whatever, that geographic area can state is. And so a good example is 10 years ago, both the cities of Jackson and the city of Rawlins had historically been divided in half or in thirds, kind of like Douglas is now. And they said, we don't want 2 legislators dividing our city in half. We want 1 legislator who represents, our city. And other cities are saying, well, we don't want that at all. We like having 2 or 3 legislators all have parts of our city because we get 3 times the amplification. And so the arguments really are going to be somewhat on the local level. If Rawlins again decides they want 1 legislator for Rawlins and Sinclair, that necessitates that next district, which is currently the largest land district outside of Alaska in the country, a legislative district, for getting even larger. And so community of interest is whatever a group of people in that municipality or that area based on ideology can come forward and say, we're a community and we want to be compact, and you may have to draw the lines around us. And the legislature would say, yeah, we agree, you're a community of interest. I think Star Valley, geographically contained, certainly has a religious ideology. And it was difficult right now that you have Star Valley drawn in the same district as Wilson, Wyoming, which is also, I would say a very more liberal part of the state and a very different ideology than Star Valley. Is that fair? That's why they have an independent who seems to represent North Star Valley, Wilson, and Northern Sublette. So community of interest is anything that a community comes and says, we want our own legislator or wants the lines drawn this way to best represent how we feel we are.
I think one thing that was interesting at the Corporations Committee meeting was a staffer from Yellowstone gave public comment over Zoom to say that they considered Yellowstone as a community. So is Yellowstone by itself a community of interest? It's a large land area that covers 2 counties, right? Do they want to work together as a block in a community for 1 district or another, or do they prefer being split in 2, where one is Park County and one is Teton County, which are kind of different places. Even though there are definitely things in common, but does a population that work in Yellowstone want that?
So that's kind of when Representative Zwonitzer, you were talking about Lincoln County and how splitting that county or not, because part of that was I can't remember the word you used, the alignment, the political alignment. And so there is some consideration of how one's ideology or a community's ideology, or you had mentioned religion even, that could be a factor. Are there other factors?
So, there's 2 kind of things at play here, and it depends on what state, and I'm sure Ben can talk about this. your corporations committee, first and foremost, wants to do what is fair. We want to do what is right by everyone as much as we can. And so if we have communities come to us and local elected officials or interest groups saying, we want the lines drawn this way, we're going to take that into account and try to meet those needs when we can. The problem, or the inverse, in the back of our minds is what I would say all states but like 10 years ago, have lawsuits against their redistricting plan. And so in the back of our minds, we don't want anything that is litigious or will be sued upon. And so if a community of interest comes forward and says, we want to be drawn this way, we're going to make sure that we have a lot of documentation, a lot of local buy-in from hopefully local elected officials to, if we do get sued, for someone to say, hey, we took a lot of public comment, and this is what on the ground we saw from these people saying, that we make a good case. And so it's kind of that two-part we're operating under. We want to be fair, we want to be equitable. We definitely don't want to be sued and be in court for 5 years like a lot of other states were in their redistricting plan. So we got to get it right the first time and make sure we're representing everyone to the best of our ability, listen to everyone we can, and then draw the lines as fairly as possible based on those local level concerns coming forward. Would that be fair, Ben, to say that a lot of states base redistricting on litigation possibilities? Is that too cynical?
I don't think it's cynical when there's so much litigation. I mean, it's hard for me to think of an area of public policy that's more litigious than this. Just to give you an example, there was a legislators from states that don't get sued really brag about it because it's so rare. It's the diamond in the rough if the state doesn't get sued at all. Now, the states that lose lawsuits, that's a much smaller number, but avoiding lawsuits altogether, that's something that states that achieve it tend to pride themselves on. And my understanding is that Wyoming has less litigation than other states, but it's clearly not without or hasn't been in the past. So, you're not North Carolina, which is sued about every 6 months, every decade on some different aspect of redistricting. But I think that is a very fair way to put it. Yes, they're trying to do what they can to head off lawsuits.
Well, and let me just speak briefly in favor of the communities of interest. And with putting aside litigation, is that if it truly meets all the marks of that, they maybe should elect their own voice to be express their interests at the legislative level. So it makes sense to have their voice intact so they can elect somebody who will represent them with fidelity in the legislature. It's more than just being territorial, I think. Anyway.
So there was a question about the timing of when a community of interest would start to advocate. Is it now? Is it at the hearings? When is a good time, and how could they do that?
So just to give you kind of the game plan, our next meeting is September 3rd in Sheridan as part of our 2-day corporations committee. That is really the meeting where we're going to decide on regions. The committee feels it best with a short time frame that we will kind of regionalize redistricting along county lines, and we may have anywhere from 4 to 10 regions of the state that we block off and say, you can have 9 legislators in these 5 counties. And I think as soon as we agree on that plan, and quite honestly, we may have 2 or 3 alternative plans at the same time, because we don't want to come to the legislature with one plan saying take it or leave it. That's a pretty big risk. And so ultimately, I'm hoping we come with our preferred plan and maybe 2 or 3 alternatives that people can say, hey, which one of these 4 or 5 are the best plan? But when we decide on regions after September 3rd, that's exactly when the communities of interest should come forward. The city's saying, hey, we want one legislative district for our city. We're exactly, about 9,500 people, or, an ideological group or a political group or a minority group come forward and say, we want our cutout for a House district based along, these lines, whatever they may be, social, demographic, religious, ideological. So that's the hope, is all through September, October, to figure out those communities of interest and debate them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last comments, because I think I'm actually right on time at 5:59. I'm supposed to stop. So if something's burning on the tip of your mouth.
The public portal should be available by September 3rd. We'll do some press releases in the media to let all the public know how to access that on the Wyoming legislative site. And so the public can use Maptitude on our site or use any of the free software out there as well. ESRI is pretty good. I used to use that before we went to Maptitude, but we would encourage the public to look at the state. And if you have interesting ideas of why we should draw lines a certain way, definitely give that input through the public portal on the legislative website, and we'll debate it. I mean, any kind of interesting thoughts or drawings, I think we're going to discuss.
And with that invite to be creative and engaged, I'm going to turn it back over to Anna. Thank you all panelists for participating today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And thanks for joining us for the People's Review Live. The Equality State Policy Center is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit organization. That means that we rely on charitable gifts to fund all of our work. Donations can be made on the web at equalitystate.org or by mailing a check to 419 South 5th Street, Suite 1, Laramie, Wyoming, 82070. Again, you can email me if you'd like to join our Leadership Circle donors, Marcia Kunstill and Joe Albright, Mike Shanzi and Kathy Jenkins, Joanne Skyam True and Shane True, and an anonymous donor. Our thanks to them for making tonight possible. If you'd like to sponsor the series, let us know. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, action alerts, or make a donation, just use the web address in the chat. And thank you again so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you at the next People's Review Live, where we'll be tackling more great topics.
Thanks to all.